Well, it is good to be back with you for another day of Bible study. This week we are beginning a new week, and so we are glad that you are here alongside and with us. All of this brought to you thanks to the generosity of those who are financial supporters of Christ Table. If you'd like to find out more about us, sign up for the email list, or even would be great if you would consider donating here. You can visit www.christtable.today. Everything you need to know is on that website. Whether or not you're a part of Christ Table, we're glad that you're here for the Bible study and would invite you to join us over these coming weeks as we look into the personality test, the Enneagram, and 36 biblical characters for each personality type. You can take the personality test, you can download the entire Bible study, and you can also get the book by Ian Crone that is a part of this study by going to that URL right there, go.christtable.today/BU. Now, one other thing that I want to tell you about, we are actually going through a book study on this book. We'd love to have you join us. This week, we're looking at Type 1, the Perfectionist or the Reformer. That's Chapter 5 in the book, and you can join us simply by going to go.christtable.today/discuss this Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. A group of us will be there to talk about that personality type and the Bible characters that are related to it, and we'd love to have you be along for the ride for that. Well, let's dig in. When we come to this new week of Bible study, we are looking into those who are Type 1 or the perfectionists, which I know is a bit of a word with some baggage. So maybe instead of the perfectionist, maybe the reformer is the word that you'd like to use. But today we're going to look at the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. We're going to take a little segment of some of Paul's writing. Wow, there is a wealth of material on Paul. So we can say with quite a bit of certainty that the Apostle Paul is a Type 1 individual. Now, we're talking about this Enneagram personality test, and right up here is, where is it? Right there. Right there is Type 1, but we're going to talk about all 9. We've talked about 8 personality, 9 personality, and now we're at 1. 8 is the challenger, the justice-motivated person who is very outspoken. We've talked about 9 that is kind of the opposite of an 8 a little bit, in that they are a peacemaker and only speak out usually whenever necessary. And today we're talking about 1, and for the rest of this week, and all 3 of those are motivated by things within themselves, motivated by their own gut instinct. And so when we look at a Type 1, this perfectionist, we're seeing actually a couple of things here. First of all, their desire is to be good and to make the world a better place. These are the type of people who have a very strong sense of their compass and the direction in which it points, and what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and what steps to get there to make the world a better place. Now, they're not always right, but they try very hard to be right. What do they worry about the most? They worry about being wrong, which is why they so badly try to be right and be perfect and get things right. They also worry about being defective or not being able to make the right decision between right or wrong. And so there can be a lot of self-deprecation that can happen from a perfectionist Type 1 personality. What is the sin that they maybe struggle with the most? Oftentimes it is anger. And so as we look at this personality type, and I want to make sure that I have that right there. Let me pull this up here, make sure that I have that right. Anger. Don't be angry with me for thinking that I could have gotten that wrong. So how do you know whether or not you're a 9? Well, maybe you're already seeing some pieces of this in you, but is this your center? Well, how many of these words describe you? A person who's principled, self-controlled, organized, reliable, driven, a rule follower, objective, resentful, fair, or conscientious. What we don't want to do when we look at these personality types, though, is see them through a negative lens. what we're coming to understand is that obviously some of the things that can be our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses as well. And so what we want to do is we want to look at ourselves with as much balance as possible and look at others with as much balance as possible, knowing that a little bit of something can be okay, but maybe sometimes a lot of something can be overbearing and can take us off of center. And so what we're hoping to do through this look into the Enneagram is to bring ourselves back to a central, healthy, unstressed place. Now, let's go ahead and look at the Apostle Paul, who most people would say is likely an Enneagram type 1, a perfectionist, a reformer personality. And Philippians chapter 3 gives us a little bit of insight into Paul. We could have gone to lots of different places, but we're going to jump in and out a little bit of Ephesians chapter 3. I hope that you'll read Philippians chapter 3. I hope that you'll read all of the verses, but I'm just going to focus on a few that really just kind of make our point. Paul begins this chapter in the letter to the church at Philippi with these words: "Whatever happens, my dear brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. I never get tired of telling you these things, and I do it to safeguard your faith." And so even that word safeguard is a great word that oftentimes will resonate deeply within somebody who has a strong sense of right or wrong, somebody who wants to be perfect, and somebody who wants to help others be perfect, be right, be best as well. And so Paul, what we see in his writings and in his teachings is trying to help people leave behind the wrong or the bad in order to understand where the good and where the right is and be able to take hold of that. And for a type 1, if somebody isn't interested in taking hold of what is right or what is best, that can be a source of anger. That could be very frustrating. So Paul now here, a couple of verses later, is going to tell us a little bit about himself. So we get a lens into Paul of the past. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old, which means that he was born in a family that was strictly and stringently Jewish, that he was born into a family that did the right thing. The 8th day, we know that Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day. This is a Jewish rite of passage, a ritual that was necessary to welcome them into the community as children of Israel. And so there's a check mark there by that verse 5 from Paul. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. So Paul is pure-blooded. There isn't any outsider, any Gentile blood running through his veins here. He also gives the member of what tribe he is in. For us, it might be like giving your denominational credentials. Maybe you're not just Baptist, but you are independent fundamental Baptist. You're not just Methodist, but you are a United Methodist from birth. You're not just Presbyterian, but you are Presbyterian Church of America. And maybe even in some of those denominations, you're even drilling down further into the region that you're a part of, or into the specific church. This is what he's doing here. He's drilling down and saying, not only am I a pure-blooded Israelite, but I also, I am of the tribe of Benjamin, and I am proud, because he's telling us to be a part of the tribe of Benjamin. And I am a real Hebrew if there ever was one. And so he's kind of putting another check mark next to his name there. I was a member of the Pharisees who demand strict obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church, and as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. And these two verses here are essentially why we would say that Paul is a 1, because now he has become a member of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a group of people who had standards for God, for right and for wrong, what was in bounds, what were out of bounds, and held themselves and tried to hold other people to those things as well. those standards we see in Scripture were kind of impossibly high because they were based on the law, and God kind of set the law to be impossible to reach. But for a type 1 person who sees a list of rules, they're not going to see that list of things that humanity should do, that people should be, like the laws in the Old Testament, and say, there's no way anybody could fulfill all of those things. So that's the point of it. No, they're going to look at that list and they're going to say, by God, I am going to do all of those things. It doesn't matter whether or not it kills me or kills you, whether you hate me or I hate myself. If this is what is right, the law, I'm going to do it. These are the people who drive the speed limit. These are the people who like to know where the boundaries are, where the rules are, and stay within those things because it's the right thing to do, and they expect others to do that as well, which can become quite a burden for them and others. Demand strict obedience, as verse 5 says. Paul says, I was so zealous, I was so into the mousetrap of following these strict rules with strict obedience that I harshly persecuted the church. I harshly persecuted people whom I did not think were following the rules in the right way. But as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. And so we're seeing multiple times here, check mark, check mark, check mark. Paul is telling us that he's a one, that he has been a perfectionist. And he even goes so far as to tell us who that caused him to be, how it caused him to act, the persecution of the church. This is something that's really important for all of us, but especially for those of us who are perfectionistic, who may or may not be type 1s, but who hold ourselves to stringent rules and hold other people to stringent rules as well. Your resume, no matter how important, no matter how righteous, no matter how good and how helpful it is for you, for your relationships, for the community, for the family, for the church, the religious organization, or other organizations that you're a part of, your resume, no matter how good it is not your relationship with God. Those are two separate things, a little like Moses parting the waters of the Red Sea, where half the water was on one side and half the water was on the other side. It's important for us to recognize that on one side is your resume and your obedience and the things that you do and the way you hold yourself and others accountable. On the other side is a relationship. Maybe it's easier for us to take this out of this religious context and place it in another context, like a family or an educational scenario. Maybe you were the parent, or maybe you had a parent who had strict rules and strict obedience. They were a perfectionist, and maybe you remember how you didn't feel a relationship with that person. You felt a relationship with the rules and your obedience with them, the compliance. You felt loved if you complied, and you felt unloved if you didn't. But you also can say that you didn't feel any emotional connection to that person. You felt good about yourself, but you didn't feel love. In school and classrooms, the teachers who were the strictest you might have liked, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you had a good relationship with them just because you were compliant with their rules. Doesn't mean they liked you or that they loved you. Now, maybe it did, both in the family and in the school, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And at the end of the day, your resume, the things that you do for God or because of God, are not your relationship with God. The Pharisees and religious leaders proved to us that you can do everything right in following the laws, strict obedience, and not love God, and not be doing things that are going to draw the love of God. They're connected, but not so strongly. Paul, in a dramatic experience on the road to the city of Damascus, wakes up to the reality that his resume was not his relationship with God. I once thought that these things were valuable, Paul says, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. I didn't know God, he says. I knew about God, but I didn't know God. And there's a difference. For his sake, then, I have discarded everything else, counted it all as garbage, rubbish. Actually, the word that Paul uses here is directly translated to English, not one that I probably should say. Line. It's kind of like ship, but a different word. That's how much his resume counted for God, he realized. And so he realized that in order for him to gain Christ, he would have to discard these other things, which means stopping elevating them to the level of a perfectionistic mindset. It's not wrong to want to improve yourself, to improve the world around you, and to help others do so as well. But there's a line in which we cross an improvement where the improvement or who we become becomes the goal. And that's when it becomes, especially spiritually, a tool of destruction. You see, at their best, Paul, perfectionists, type 1s, have an amazing ability to see the potential improvement in things around them and to take action to bring that vision to fruition. But at their worst, ones can be overcritical of themselves and of others, leaving everyone feeling as if they don't measure up. And this is where it kind of begins, it is the internalization of that need to be perfect, to be loved because of obedience and compliance, that helps people create a reality where they have to be perfect and they can't, and so they become critical of themselves for not being able to keep up. But instead of solving that internal crisis, what they do is they just project that onto other people and then expect other people to be perfect rather than dealing with their own mess and solving that. They turn that to others and become overly critical of others, and so they don't feel like they measure up. Let's make everybody not measure up. An unhealthy 9 is going to hold other people to levels of perfection that are unreasonable, that are unnecessary, and sometimes even that are wrong. Because oftentimes 9s or 1s, the perfectionist sense of what is right is not right. That's the danger in thinking as a 1, you're always right, that your perfection is perfect. Paul, before he became a follower of Jesus Christ, was in type 1 at their worst, overly critical of himself and of others, leaving everyone feeling as if they don't measure up. What Paul does, though, when he encounters Christ, is he becomes a 1 and leverages those things for the best. An amazing ability to see potential improvement in everything around them and to take action and bring that vision to fruition. This is why Paul is often and rightly, I think, said to be the greatest missionary of all time, the greatest teacher and preacher of the gospel of all time. And it wasn't because his style was perfect or his words were perfect or that he ever always did everything right. The reason we say that is really because of his motivation, because of his willingness to just get out on the field and help improve people's lives by introducing them to Jesus. That's what we see in Paul's writings. the ability not to correct people to be perfect in their relationship with God. But what we see in Paul's writings, if we truly are looking at what's going on there, is Paul's trying to help enable people to improve themselves. And he's taking action and encouraging others to take action to make that dream of a right and healthy and whole relationship with God a reality. But Paul had to accept himself. And Paul had to allow others to accept themselves as well, where they are, who they were, what their strengths and what their weaknesses were, and accepting that others aren't always going to do it right and be perfect, and that's okay. And for Paul especially, realizing that he wasn't always going to do it right and be perfect. You see, we have to realize something that Paul realized, and that self-improvement is good, but self-acceptance is better. Self-improvement is good, but self-acceptance is better. And in the kingdom of God, oftentimes what we do is we find people who are continually trying to improve themselves in order to become perfect, when really what just needs to happen is they just need to accept where they are, and that it's going to be a path. It's going to be a journey. Self-acceptance is better than self-improvement. I've been around people who thought that spiritually they were perfect, made no mistakes, were sinless. Some of those people are still on my Facebook feed, and I still see it. And first of all, they're not perfect. They're not sinless. But they're also not happy. They're not miserable. I mean, they're miserable. They're like Paul pre-Damascus. They're Paul pre-realization that his greatest weakness in life was himself and his pursuit of perfection. When Paul begins to understand that self-acceptance is better, rather than being overly critical on himself and him not being where he needs to be, and we see a lot of this in Romans 5, 6, and 7. Whenever Paul comes to a place where he accepts he's never going to be where he wants to be, he allows himself the permission to simply make the journey to be as healthy and as good as he can. And in allowing himself to do that, he allows others to do it as well. Well, it's been good to be with you this morning. Looking forward to being back with you for the rest of the week as we look at 3 other type 1 perfectionist reformer personalities. These are incredible individuals. Type 1s are incredible individuals as well. Be blessed. Until tomorrow.